Did Final Fantasy 16 leave the old fans behind?
Today, I want to do something a little bit different because I noticed that in the run-up to and release of Final Fantasy 16, there was a small but growing group of people online who began to say that they had problems with this newest release in the famous RPG franchise. Yep. This time produced by Creative Business Unit 3, the team—
I cannot get over the fact that Creative Business Unit 3? Couldn't y'all come up with a better fucking name than that? That's like the least creative thing that you can think of.
The team behind the extremely popular Final Fantasy XIV MMORPG. And at the time, I felt like I understood 16 is a different direction for Final Fantasy, and one that some people will either like or not like, and that's totally fine. But over the months leading to release, and with the drop of the demo, and now at launch, that not for me has kind of morphed into a not my Final Fantasy. A sort of catch-all phrase that I think harkens back to what is really a non-existent era where we all knew what Final Fantasy was, and 16? Well, it ain't it. Which is nonsense.
I feel like Final Fantasy has always been an innovator. It always has been. Like, this isn't anything new, and I think the reason why Final Fantasy, like, 15, people didn't really give a shit about it as much is because it didn't really feel like it was an innovator. At least, it didn't seem like that to me. I watched it. I didn't play it.
Never been a this is what Final Fantasy is. Every single Final Fantasy game has pushed the boundaries of what the franchise was before. Yeah. And every single one is different, even if those differences are only in storytelling or world building. So when, for example, I watched SkillUp's review of the game, which, by the way, a good review, dude makes great content.
Oh my god, people were so mad at SkillUp for making this fucking review because he didn't say the game was that great. He didn't like it that much. I appreciate his review. I think that it's good to have people that have different opinions because I don't think that anything that he said in the review was like super fucking like wrong. I just didn't value it at the same scale that he did, which is fine. That's totally okay. But I think he made a number of good points and it was fine. He explained it pretty well why I didn't like it, which is fair. Yes. I don't think he invented this review to create criticism or controversy.
It bugged the hell out of me that the video opened with, in Square Enix's haste to evolve this franchise into something new, they've left behind far too much that made Final Fantasy Final Fantasy. In trying to reach a new audience, they've left behind the audience that got the franchise to this point. And while most reviews and most players are extremely happy with the game, that's the thing I noticed in most of the negative talk about it, that there's this undercurrent of they've chosen to leave what made Final Fantasy Final Fantasy. They're leaving old fans behind for the new. And look, getting new fans was one.
I think that's a smart thing to do. Like, Breath of the Wild left old fans behind. Ocarina of Time left old fans behind. How? What the fuck are you talking about, how? It was a massive departure from what the games were before. Halo? Yeah, like, I mean, I don't know about Halo. Like, Halo... What was it? I mean, like, Halo was, like, different from Marathon, yeah. But, like, I'm trying to think about besides that. I'm not sure. Breath of the Wild's barely a Zelda game. Yeah, I feel like whenever Halo left old fans behind, that's not really a good example, because I feel like they kind of did. It's not good. But I think that it's important to innovate on the game. And I think that with Final Fantasy 17, whenever it comes out, they will probably have... I think that based off of the feedback that they're receiving, and based off of how well I'm assuming Dragon's Dogma 2 is going to be received, I think we're going to probably see something of more of a party system in Final Fantasy 17, because I do think the developers are listening to this feedback, and that I don't think that all feedback is accurate of like, oh yeah, this is what's wrong with the game, this is what needs to be fixed. Probably not. But like, whenever people feel a certain way, the way that they feel isn't necessarily wrong, but it's up to the developer to really decide how to solve that problem. You see kind of what I mean?
100% the goal of Creative Business Unit 3. Yoshida, the producer of this N14, said as much. And I think due to the franchise's history and impact, many players have created their own idea of what Final Fantasy is to them, turning a blind eye to what the series is as a whole. It reminds me of when I was asked to be on a special board for PAX with various other people in the gaming space, and the question they asked us to help them solve was, how can we grow PAX? Because at the moment, our core audience and attendees are getting older, having kids.
Yeah, they're getting old and fat, and their hair is turning gray, and they're not coming to gaming conventions anymore, and we don't like this. Yep, there it is. Blizzard's been having this same problem for a while, too.
Less time to come to the show, so how do we grow? And so myself and all the others in the room sat around, thinking up all sorts of ways they could do this, offering advice, but the pushback we kept getting was, if we take your advice, we could risk alienating those who already attend.
Yeah.
And so the conversation would devolve into, what is the point of having us here if you're afraid to take the big risks? The only way you grow is by doing.
And that's actually a really good point, is Jesse Cox used to be a WoW player. Like, he was really, really, really into WoW. Actually, like, I mean, I have a personal story about Jesse. This is like the first time I ever went to BlizzCon. I'm pretty sure Jesse Cox didn't even know who the fuck I was. And he just gave me his +1 for the Wowhead party. But he was like, oh, you trying to get in? Yeah, sure, you can come with me. It's fine. Yeah. So yeah, he's a nice guy. I like him. It's good.
Doing this on this very channel, one which I have had probably far too long, I spent 10 years doing Let's Plays. And then the ecosystem changed, and Twitch is where you went to go watch Let's Plays, and YouTube Let's Plays kind of died off unless you had some sort of gimmick or some sort of fun.
Yeah, they're not that much of a thing anymore.
Goof thing that you were doing. For the most part, most people didn't want to watch complete Let's Plays on YouTube. Especially from someone who, in gaming space or influencer or content creator terms, is an old man.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is like, as a guy, right? I mean, this is a fucking fact. Is like, whenever I remember one time, so this is like, all right, I was like 16 at the time, and I remember we were hanging out at McDonald's, and we were supposed to be at school. We weren't at school. We were at McDonald's, and some guy came over who was 20 years old, and it felt really weird to me that he was hanging out with us, because like, the difference between 16 and 20 is so big. Like, you know what I mean? It felt really weird. Like, am I, like, and that's probably the way y'all felt too, right? Like, overall, yeah, is it? Yeah, it is. It definitely is. It's really big. Like, at 16, you've got, you know, not only you've got a whole year, and the guy wasn't weird or anything. We just both happened to be at McDonald's and we were hanging out, right? It's not, he wasn't a creep or a weirdo or anything. I'm just saying, like, this is just like a fucking random encounter that happened. And super senior, well, we had people that were 20 in my high school too. That's a good point, but that's different. Anyway, so, like, you know, if you're 20, you've been out of school for 2 fucking years, man. Like, you've probably either had a job, you've moved out of your parents' house, you're going to college, you've been at college for over a year. Like, bro, 18 to 20 is like a big fucking deal, man. So, like, yeah, 16 to 20 is huge. So it's like, whenever you're an older guy, you're not going to attract the same type of young audience. Like, you're not going to have Minecrafters that are super popular with the kids that are like 41. It just doesn't happen. And maybe, I mean, I'm sure it happens once or twice, right? But it's like definitely a super minority, and it's very uncommon. And it's just because people relate to, some of these streamers are kind of old though. I know, exactly. But like, what I'm saying is that, like, whenever you're young, and it becomes even more of a, you know, it's like half your age plus 7 or whatever the fuck that thing is. Like, I think that's also like a life experience type thing too, where like, if you're that far away from somebody in age, it's harder for you to relate to them.
So I stopped for the most part and instead did more news related things and videos like this. And yeah, sure, I took a hit at the start. People who had been here for a while were like, this isn't the Jesse I know, not my Jesse. But the channel recovered, it's growing again, and I've never been happier. And that is...
And it took Jesse a while to do that, right? It's not like that shit happened overnight. It took him years.
what's happening to Final Fantasy. In order to keep the franchise around another 30 years, they have to grow and change and become something that more reflects what today's gamers want.
Absolutely.
And going back to SkillUp's review, just look at the comments. People in the comments are saying, never played a Final Fantasy, but I'm going to try this one out. And that is a huge victory for Yoshida and Square Enix and everyone involved, no matter what the lineage of Final Fantasy is.
Yep.
And we should talk that lineage, because Final Fantasy is a series that has always been about taking risks. The name Final Fantasy comes partially from the fact that it was Sakaguchi.
Look at Final Fantasy XI, for example. Like, that was like, wasn't that basically one of the first online MMORPGs on a console? It's like insane. What the fuck? Yeah, I feel like people don't pay enough respect to how many different risks they've taken over the years.
Gucci's last attempt, his final risk at creating something before giving up on game dev altogether. But the game was a hit, and each iteration since has taken the same risks. The rest is history. A history worth talking about, because I'm still asking the question, when was Final Fantasy Final Fantasy?
I never realized he broke the staff in that cinematic.
And more importantly, how do you even define what that means? Clearly, we're gonna include music. The music has always been amazing in Final Fantasy. The visuals, even back in the Sprite in Mode 7 days, were stunning. Then maybe when you say it's not Final Fantasy, you mean the combat system. How it's not turn-based, or it looks different. You miss the active time battles, which really haven't been a thing since 2001 in Final Fantasy X. But
it's just like, I just feel like turn-based games don't have the same... They don't have the same clout that they used to have. I mean, for lack of a better word, like, turn-based games used to be massive, and like now they're still around. It's not like there's no turn-based games. I mean, they didn't die like RTS died, but they're not as popular as they were in 2001.
Final Fantasy 11 and 14 are MMORPGs and have MMORPG-style combat. 12...
they're not dead. Please, they're not dead. There's Octopath Traveler, Star Rail, fucking Darkest Dungeon, Persona, Divinity. I'm not saying that they're dead, but let's be real. They're not as big as they used to be.
Did away with random encounters and made enemies visible on the map. The active time battle system became the active dimension battle system and introduced gambits. 13 returned to a variant of the ATB system, although with much more button mashing. 15 introduced an action-based system called the Active Cross Battle, which instead of a menu, players mapped buttons on a controller. They're all over the place. And the active time battle system of old wasn't really introduced until Final Fantasy 4 and 5, and then 5 had the job system, which was a whole other thing, and then that wasn't in Final Fantasy 6. So I guess then maybe when you're saying it's not your Final Fantasy, you're talking about the setting or the world building. But even there, the games have always about the setting.
Wasn't this Secret of Mana? Didn't Secret of Mana have this exact same thing with the cannonballs? That's crazy. So Final Fantasy IV had the same thing. Holy shit, I didn't even know that. Secret of Mana takes place in the same world? What the fuck? I had no idea.
Or the world building. But even there, the games have always pushed the boundaries. Final Fantasy 1 through 5 were fantasy stories set in worlds of castles and crystals, and sure, there were airships and chocobos.
And I think also, like, if I'm sure he's probably going to talk about this, but like Final Fantasy 14, I feel like that game really started to pop off whenever I started to really hear about it was Stormblood. Because Stormblood was whenever they kind of said, you know what? We're not just going to be a WoW clone anymore. We're going to be our own game. And I think after that, and then going into Shadowbringers, and then obviously Endwalker, but mainly Stormblood and Shadowbringers, whenever it gained its own identity. Because if you look at the original A Realm Reborn abilities, so many things from Final Fantasy XIV were just like lifted off of WoW because WoW did this, and so we're going to do this too. And then somebody over there was like, wait a minute, why the fuck are we doing the same thing they're doing? This isn't good for the game.
Moogles, but all of that took time to develop too. There were no chocobos in Final Fantasy 1. The first Moogle was in Final Fantasy 3. Final Fantasy 4 was the first time they really started to delve into deep character drama. Final Fantasy VI was this push into the trope of magic versus technology. 7 then took that concept and ran with it, as technology and its impact on the world played a major role in that storytelling. Hell, you spent the first part of that game in a giant city, dystopian...
This is Final Fantasy VII? I have never played Final Fantasy VII. The closest thing I've ever come to that is watching Esfand play the remake, and I watched Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. That's it. I never played Final Fantasy VII. I want to play the remake.
Cyberpunk setting, which was shocking at the time. 8 is about teens and floating schools battling other school kids and then witches. 9 is a return to fantasy as a tribute to the games that came before it. And then 10 brings us the world of Blitzball.
Dude, I really cannot express, like, Final Fantasy X. I don't know if there was ever a game that was, for its time, as much of a graphics update as Final Fantasy X. It was fucking ridiculous for its time. It was disgusting.
Cities and a world that, for the first time, is kind of modeled off something different compared to the other games.
Was like, look at these graphics, and like this was at the same time that other characters were just 17 different triangles. It was fucking ridiculous.
Games, this time being inspired by Southeast Asia. 11 is straight up an old school MMORPG with fantasy tropes abound.
Well, no. I wish he had covered this more. Final Fantasy XI was the biggest and the first that people still remember to this day console MMORPG. Final Fantasy XI is fucking insane. It's still going.
Was a return to magic versus technology in a vast desert-filled world, echoing more Star Wars than Final Fantasy. 13, 1, 2, and 3 are straight up anime as hell and set in a semi-futuristic world. And 15 is literally 4 dudes pushing a car to the song Stand By Me. And I saved 14 for last since it's ongoing, and honestly, since Yoshida produces this game as well, it makes sense to save this for the end of the list. If you don't know the history of this game, just go watch the No-Clip documentary.
That documentary was so good. I watched the whole thing.
It's amazing. But it also clearly establishes that 14 is a love letter to every single one of these other games I mentioned.
Yep.
Yoshida and the team love Final Fantasy. There is absolutely no way they would set out to ruin that. The changes they've made to 16 aren't drastic or crazy attempts to lure a new audience. They're keeping with tradition. And yeah, you may still have the complaint that it's more Game of Thrones than Final Fantasy. And
it does have a lot of Game of Thrones elements. It does. Absolutely.
First, I feel like a lot of people are still upset about Game of Thrones. Look, it hurt me too. That ending sucked. But it's still like a loaded phrase. It's akin to calling something the Dark Souls of. There's this connotation that they're not trying to do anything new. They're just trying to copy something else and lure people in. But I still feel like that complaint is off the mark. Like, I don't understand what you mean by that. I don't think you mean...
If a game has rolling and iframes, it's Dark Souls. It's just that simple. Yeah. So if you can roll or you can iframe things, it's Dark Souls.
Fantasy settings. There have been fantasy settings in Final Fantasy games forever. Is that it's trying to be more adult? More mature? Have sexual situations, violence, swearing in that fantasy setting? I mean, you probably didn't play or like Final Fantasy Tactics then, because that game is Game of Thrones as shit. And it's not even a mainline game. Adult themes have been part of Final Fantasy for decades. The only difference is, culturally, we're in a place where the average video game player is 30-something. And the developers...
Really? Holy shit.
And more importantly, the translators who are responsible for making a lot of the previous Final Fantasy games more kid-friendly. They're like, we don't have to hide our adult story under the veneer of teen or kid-friendly anymore.
Yeah, like, I mean, Final Fantasy 16, that game is raw. That shit is raw as hell.
Just some examples off the top of my head. Final Fantasy VI had genocide, suicide, slavery, and much worse, but that's spoilers. 7 literally had a scene where a man tries to rape one or more of the main characters. Hell, there's straight up a story beat about forcing two characters into interspecies sex. One of the main themes of 9 is a child coming to terms with life, death, and
there's even there's an implied rape plotline of Final Fantasy 16. Like, I'm not gonna give it away or anything like that, but there is an implication.
What any of it's for. Hell, 10 is about the corruption of religion. There are so many examples I couldn't possibly remember all of them or spell them out for you, but I'm sure people in the comments will. And that's what rubs me wrong about all of this.
Well, and look at like Final Fantasy 14. The reason why those stories are good is because it doesn't caricature the bad people as just universally horrible people that's all there is to it, right? Like, they actually are, it's a genuine struggle of ideals and conflict. They'll show you how they got that way. Yeah, exactly. Final Fantasy 14 already has real world politics to it. Yeah, they have like the old refugee thing. I think that's the first one that comes to mind. For sure.
New? Even the complaints. You don't even have to go far back to see examples of that. When Final Fantasy 12 came out, fans thought it was a little too mature and serious compared to 10 and 10-2, which had some mature themes but were presented differently. When 7 came out, sure, it was praised by many people, but at the same time, reviewers would...
One of the big reasons is that they had 2 girls in that game that had big boobs. So, like, at that time, a lot of the people who were 30 now were, like, 14 then, 13, you know, like, so this was, like, a really, really good game.
Say stuff like, the storytelling is lengthy, involved, and definitely too dialogue heavy for preteen attention spans. There's also swear words in adult situations.
Yeah.
Or, but while most Japanese RPGs are happy to adopt an if it's not broke, don't fix it attitude in bringing their titles across from the 16-bit days, Final Fantasy VII has decided to divorce itself almost entirely from its predecessors and tip the whole genre on its head. Look, it's more than okay to not like a game for any number of reasons. If you don't like 16, that's fine. But to say it's not Final Fantasy or leaving fans behind is an insult to the legacy of what these games are. They're all unique. They're all different and willing to try unique and different things. That's what makes them special. So while you may not like the changes they made to this one, like how I didn't like 13, it's still exactly what it has always been. Taking chances.
It doesn't have to be, like, not every single one has to be exactly what you want, you know?
Pushing boundaries and trying to reach a new audience. That's what makes it such a fun franchise. You can be a fan of 8 or 12 or 4 or 6 or 16 or maybe just 7. But I promise you, for the vast majority of fans, even you watching right now, you most likely became a fan because of a risk or change that might have upset another player.
That's actually a really, really good fucking point. That's actually, wow.
But it got you hooked. There is no My Final Fantasy. There's just Final Fantasy.
Holy shit.
Good, bad, and everything in between.
That was really good. Holy shit. Wow. Really good video? Yeah, that was just a really, really good video. And he's right, you know, in terms of me. I became a big fan of Final Fantasy because of Final Fantasy VII, which apparently took a lot of risks from back in the day. And I always liked the little sprites, you know, I especially liked the little black mage sprite with like the little hat and the dark face, you can't see him. Oh, those were so cool, man. Play Blue Protocol on VPN, please. I'll get banned. They'll ban me. Jesse's almost at 1 million subs. I'll give you guys a link. Maybe you guys can give him some subs, help him get there, man. Very good game. Yeah, I need to play it, man. I really do. Anyone shown Zach those stylish Final Fantasy 16 I feel like I've done some pretty good combos myself, okay? Like, I mean, come on. What the fuck? Well, anyway, yeah. I think that Final Fantasy next time around, especially... I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is actually going to be, if it's as good as Dragon's Dogma 1 is, and people like it as much, I think that if it comes out and it is as good as the first one and as good as people say it will be, I think that it will shift the genre. I think it will shift the entire thing. I'm going to be playing Dragon's Dogma 1. I'll be playing it probably next month, realistically. That's my plan. I want to play it next month. Yeah, I do think that it will shift the entire genre. And I think that we'll see elements of what people kind of explain Dragon's Dogma has. I think we'll probably see that in Final Fantasy 17 as a response to people's feedback. But yeah, I think Final Fantasy 16 is great. I think the critics of Final Fantasy 16 are just like the guys that they see a picture of an obviously really hot girl on Twitter and they comment, pointy elbows, pointy knees, 2 out of 10. Not for me. That's the kind of way that people, that's the kind of people that are ranking Final Fantasy 16 as a 4. Is it a 10 though? Maybe not. I haven't finished the game. I think that right now, I would say the game is a 9.5. It might go to a 10 depending on how it ends. But yeah, right now I'm saying it's a 9.5. Before you touch the game, you think it'll be, you said it would be Game of the Year. Don't you think that's weird? Not really. I mean, I could have probably told you that Zelda was probably going to be one of the contenders for Game of the Year before it came out too. Because I know Nintendo, and they make incredible games, and they're making a game. We know Yoshida. We know the people that are working on Final Fantasy 16. We know it's going to be an incredible game. It's the same as whenever From Software comes out. Like I said, Elden Ring was going to be Game of the Year before it came out too. How about that?